I was just going to make sure we're recording. So, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're discussing today layering conversational AI into your product. Just a quick first word of introductions for Rupa and I. I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Polly Allen. So I've worked for over 20 years now, actually, in tech. I had started as a software engineer and then was an engineering manager at places like Amazon and Elsevier. I really got into technical and product management from there. So my background is in computer science at the University of Victoria and my master's from MIT. I led the development and launch most recently in my role as a principal PM technical at Alexa. I led the development and launch of the first generative AI answers on Alexa in 2020. And I left in 2022 to found AI Career Boost to help more people get into careers in product management for AI. So I'm excited to be here today and help clarify how AI can be worked in feasibly to your 2024 roadmap. Rupa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Polly. Hey, everyone. So great to have you here today. My background is in product and UX design, and I've been very fortunate to be working in the intersection of emerging technologies. There's a lot of acronyms here, but basically that's been the trend for the last couple of decades here. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, AR, VR, and computer vision space, voice and non-voice conversational interfaces, helping companies and startups basically find applications for these cool new tech and merging it with human-centered design so we can create delightful experiences for our users. That's what I've been up to for the last 15 years. My background is in product design, and I have a master's from Stanford University majoring in product design. I'm currently at Uber, leading a team of very talented designers who focus on merchant and advertisements. I've also worked before with Alexa, where Polly and I collaborated on several projects, helping users find, discover, and shop for products using Alexa devices, as well as previously at Google and several AI startups. Super stoked to have you join us today. I want to take a quick second to just give you a sense of the breadth of work that both Polly and I have done in the last few years that includes voice interfaces. So basically devices that don't have any screens, and you're having conversations purely with an AI without any other distractions or any other mechanism of interaction with that AI. Chatbots, which are very standard these days, where you're kind of interacting with the AI using a chat interface that you're very used to using your phone devices. Multimodal, which is a combination of voice and text as well as GUI. So you're interacting with the screen, you're speaking to the screen, as well as you are interacting with follow-up sources as well. And finally, visual AI, where there is no text at all. It's a pure visual input and GUI input. So there are different modalities of how you could create conversational experiences. And we worked in a pretty broad spectrum of these interfaces in the past. So why did we want to do this talk? We realized that it's the beginning of Q1 and H1 for some folks. We've done our planning, our roadmap reviews. Hopefully, resource allocations are all complete. But some of you, most of you hopefully, have an AI product on your roadmap, and you've decided to invest in it, you've decided to make a bet, or you've decided, okay, we do believe that this is where we need to spend our priorities this year, so let's just do it. So how are you going to go from roadmap to reality? And it's one of the challenges we are seeing a lot of teams struggle with these days. Is there's a lot of hype and excitement, a lot of top-down directive, a lot of competitive benchmarking around these days, as how do I launch before my competitor? How do I catch up? Or how do I just follow directive from leadership? But translating something on your roadmap line item to a real MVP that users absolutely love is a whole different set of challenges. So we are here today to share our experiences, possibly narrow it down to one case study so that we can walk you through step by step how we did it. And we hope that you find value in this brief session that we've organized in partnership with Reforge. So today's topics basically are a three-pronged framework that we thought would be interesting to you. One is scoping the MVP. How do you go from I've got this thing on my roadmap to now I need to scope the MVP? Again, a very common area of challenge that we see across different teams, no matter what the size of the company is and what your focus area is. Scoping the MVP is super critical and one of the areas that a lot of teams struggle with. How do you evaluate the tech stack and understand the risk associated with your choices, as well as the impact on both the product scope as well as the user experience? So we'll cover some of the choices that are available and how we might have made those choices for a project we worked on. And finally, gaining product user alignment. So how do you know that you've made the right choices? How do you validate the hypothesis you made? And how do you launch a robust product that you believe is adding value to users? So again, sharing a couple of best practices around there. So that's basically our agenda for today. We will leave some time in the end for Q&A. We have a lot of content to cover, so we'd like to spend the next 30 minutes sharing our framework as well as case studies, and then we'll indulge in Q&A for the last 15 minutes. So please share your questions in the Q&A board, and we will come to it as soon as we're done with our session. Awesome. Let's jump right into it. So scoping the MVP, think of it as the first step after you have identified what you are building in the roadmap. Traditionally, we all understand the definition of MVP is minimum viable product. And the way a lot of teams take this approach is to identify what is the most minimally viable scope that you can ship for a specific feature or a product, which will get you to the goals that you're trying to achieve and get you a sense of how do you test demand, or just get a sense of whether users are interested or ready to adopt this new product or feature, right? So pretty standard definition across the board, and everyone should be familiar with it. Having said that, in the case of an AI product, it just gets a little messier, more complex. And we decided to adopt the very popular framework at Amazon. It's called MLP. So basically, minimum lovable product, which means that it's not just the most minimally viable product, it's actually lovable. Users find value in it. They keep coming back to it and they use it, and they believe that it's solving a problem or it's meeting a need, right? And so how do you get to that point? And Amazon had this mindset of we don't ship MVPs, we ship MLPs. And this is a great framework to adopt when you're thinking about AI products, because in the case of AI-enabled products, the user expectations is considerably higher than traditional products. We're positioning a product as an AI experience or powered by AI, like a lot of companies are doing today. It raises the bar when it comes to how users expect the product to perform, what the user experience should be, how smart the product should be, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to raise the bar here right at the stage and think of how you're going to shape your MLP. So thinking about traditional MVP scoping, right? You're defining some core use cases, and you're defining how do you offer this functionality to our users. In some cases, it might be straightforward. You might have a single interface like a web product or mobile app, and it's very straightforward for you to make that decision. In some cases, you might have multiple surfaces, and you might need to make a choice. Where do we launch this product first, right? And that in nutshell is what a lot of teams do, is define the use cases, define how they're going to let the users access this use case, and that becomes your scope for MVP. How is that different for AI products? There's some additional complexity that you need to consider while scoping your MVP. So what does that incremental complexity look like? One is thinking about flexibility. And what do I mean by that is, how flexible do you want the AI experience to be? Is it going to be super structured? Like, think of Notion as a product where you provide specific call to actions and buttons or actions where the users can interact with AI. It's very structured. There's only one thing you can do, which is click on this button and ask Notion to write a blog post for you, for example, right? Versus something that is, say, Booking.com, which has recently launched a chatbot for booking travel experiences. And you can just write anything you feel like, and it's a very, very flexible experience where users can go back and forth, have multiple turns, and just keep refining what they're looking for. So thinking about how flexible versus how structured the product experience needs to be is something that you want to consider upfront as you're defining the MVP. The second aspect of this would be how integrated this experience needs to be. In some cases, you would think of how AI is deeply integrated in the current user experience. A lot of companies, including Bing, Google, and Amazon, are making huge investments in this space and revamping their search experiences, for example, or their discovery experiences, where AI is deeply integrated, and it doesn't feel any different to the user that there is an AI integration in this experience, but the results and the user experience is smarter, faster, and more richer in that sense. Having said that, there are companies who are also thinking of a less integrated approach where you have an entry point like a chat button or a special window, and it's very different from the traditional product experience you have. So the expectations from the users and the interactions are limited to that standalone experience. And chatbots are a great example for that. So you want to think about flexibility versus structure and integrated versus standalone. These are super critical aspects to think about upfront in the process. And then more importantly, how do you think about what incremental value is AI going to offer to your user? Why would they want to change their behaviors where they are used to using the product in a certain way? Now you're asking them to change their behaviors, try something different. They need to have some incremental value to be able to make that behavior change, and understanding that and defining it upfront is important. So these dimensions should help you configure your bare bones of the MVP. How did we do it? Let me give you an example of a product that we launched at Alexa a couple of years ago. It's still very live. If any of you have Alexa devices, you can test it out even today. It's called the Nutrition Assistant. And the idea was to create an experience for users where they can discover content that was going to help them improve their lifestyle if they wanted to be healthy and drive better well-being. Basically, we followed the same framework that I'm sharing here, which is number one, define the key jobs to be done. Identify what's the incremental value from AI. Define the interface, make sure that you're very clear what is the right interface for this experience, and then determine the degree of flexibility you want to offer versus how integrated or standalone this product is going to be. So for the nutrition assistant experience, we defined the key jobs to be done, where the user wanted to just learn through bite-sized, actionable ideas and tips how they can improve their overall health and well-being. They wanted to personalize their experience to make sure that their dietary constraints and goals are met. They want to be able to take action. Just giving an idea or a tip didn't make sense. They want to make sure that they can act upon those tips. So if you tell them that, hey, consuming omega-3 supplements is a great way for you to drive your health and well-being, they want to be able to say, okay, which omega-3 capsules and where should I buy it from, right? So taking the idea from idea to execution. They want to keep themselves accountable through regular reminders, etc. And eventually they want to start exploring different ideas and different new ways of staying healthy. So they wanted a very broad range of tips and ideas to choose from. So having listed some of these core jobs to be done, the team decided how they want to prioritize and which jobs to be done do they want to focus on. At this stage, you can choose that, hey, we might not be able to do personalization, but let's focus on just providing access to a broad range of actionable ideas. And then maybe phase two could look like, hey, we want to be able to take actions on those ideas, and personalization could come later. And this kind of a prioritization at this stage will help you scope out your first version of the product, the first rollout, and be able to focus on the problem solving as well. From here, we started mapping what the current jobs to be done versus where the AI value exists, right? So if you're just looking for, I want to be able to provide users with a broad range of nutrition and wellness tips, AI can generate this set of, very diverse tips catering to different types of user personas in a short amount of time. You could either, kind of tie up at the back end and be able to tie up with some publishers and quickly generate this. The user experience as a result is one that enables fresh content every time they engage with the feature. There are no dead ends for the user. They have lots and lots to browse and discover. In terms of personalization, you could leverage past data, historical preferences, profile information to help personalize that experience, which basically would result into higher relevance, which is higher engagement for most products. And in the case of conversational experiences, it's more follow-through actions. And finally, incorporating tips into their lifestyle. How do they execute on these ideas? You would be able to map a catalog at scale, even identify substitutions so that if a user has dietary restriction, AI would be able to provide an alternate solution very quickly. And how you leverage that in the user experiences, helping them be able to map the nutrition tip to a specific item that then gets delivered to their doorstep. So we did this mapping for all the core jobs to be done and identify where the AI value exists, which is incremental to what the user is doing today, and then followed through in terms of the tech stack and the risk assessment to make sure that there's feasibility accompanying with this level of thinking for us. We also determined where there is maximum impact, so higher ROI for the user experience. And this matrix, just picking a few pieces in this matrix, helped us narrow down our MVP scope. From here, what we did was just looked at the breakdown of users across the phone app that Amazon had, headless versus headed devices. And we realized that a maximum number of users currently use headless devices. So that ended up being our choice of device. We wanted to evaluate whether users need to see the item before they purchase, and then understanding what context they're using this feature. So are they on the go versus they're inside their home, multitasking and trying to get access to nutrition tips. With asking these questions across the cross-functional org, we were able to narrow down and choose the headless device as a primary interface and voice becoming the modality. And finally, thinking about flexibility versus integration, we had a pretty awesome North Star vision where from a phase-wise approach, we'll start with a headless device, super structured approach, where we just want to validate demand before investing in a flexible UX. All the way from there to, can we create a deeply integrated experience all the way on Amazon.com and even Whole Foods, for example. So we've built a North Star, but then, thinking across these user journeys helped us decide how flexible versus structured we want this experience to be. We chose to keep a very structured experience in the MVP version. And we decided to keep it very deeply integrated into the current Alexa experience. Awesome. So that was our process in terms of scoping the MVP and all the different dimensions we considered. From there, I'm going to pass on to Polly to talk about how we evaluated the tech stack and consider the different risks associated with it.
100%. Thanks, Rupa. Let's move to the next slide. So one of the things that a lot of people battle with today is that there are so many options when selecting a tech stack, right? Of course, a lot of folks are gravitating towards the new large language model or LLM approaches for chatbots, copilots, et cetera, if you're designing conversational AI. And it's important to know that there are a lot of options within a spectrum. So everything from traditional NLU, which is the natural language understanding approach to building chatbots. These were the systems upon which Alexa, many corporate enterprise chatbots and customer service systems were built on these for years, right? They explicitly try to understand what the user's intent is, and then they pass off to try and actually provide systems and rules for how to respond in a much more granular approach than we do within these large language models, where all the logic is sort of left to this third-party system or an open source system if we select those, right? And it's important to consider the trade-offs. Oh, sorry, let's stay on that slide there, Rupa. The trade-offs between the time to implement. One of the things that large language models and things like OpenAI's new custom GPT builder have unlocked is really the ability to develop these systems much more quickly, the time to implement and the difficulty of implementing them. Instead of requiring development resources, you can build one yourself in about 10 minutes, right? But the degree of control you have over what the chatbot is or a copilot is actually going to say, right? Along with there's a lot of security concerns. Finally, Rupa mentioned flexibility. There's kind of two aspects of flexibility. There's how much flexibility your chatbot has in understanding the different ways a user might phrase a request or the diversity of different things it might ask the chatbot to do. But there's also flexibility in your tech choices. When you come later, if you validate an idea, are you going to then be able to use that same prototype to try it in a more integrated way with some other features on your website, et cetera, right? And you lose some of that technical flexibility when you go to these quicker to implement options. So let's take a deeper dive. For LLMs, we are talking about OpenAI's ChatGPT, as well as other offerings like Bard from Google, Anthropic's, Claude, Cohere, etc. Many of them do have APIs that you can use to work with them directly. And most recently, OpenAI has unlocked a lot of options by providing a custom GPT builder. So let's move on to that. For those who haven't seen these before, it's important to note that the costs are one of the biggest trade-offs you'll be making along this. So when you're selecting something to build a MVP or at least get a prototype out to validate some user hypotheses, right? Obviously, the quickness to develop is important. But as you evolve in the product, the number of transactions you have, how many exchanges are you having with how many users, that cost per interaction is quite high for LLMs versus going to be very, very low for traditional NLU, where you have static rules in place, right? Custom GPTs, I put question mark, question mark. Right now, they are free to build, free to share, free to use. There's no cost incurred on you as the builder or on the user, but it's unclear the path forward. OpenAI has not released their plans for monetizing these or the plans for how the costs will be shared with the creators. So it's important to know we might be in this golden space right now where this is all being funded by OpenAI and Microsoft, but that might not always be the case. So for those who haven't seen the custom GPTs before, you do need to be a GPT Plus user to access this feature, but you can create a new GPT. This is what you'll see, right? It's kind of a wizard-like interface under this create button that just says, hi, I'll help you build a new GPT. And you can chat with it to specify what you'd like to create. So it's like a chatbot to create a chatbot, kind of inception. And you'll able to specify exactly how you want it to work. You can even provide your own files and data for it to use as background knowledge. Next slide, please, Rupa. I wanted to show this in action. So let's say hypothetically we had wanted to create a custom GPT for our nutrition assistant, Alexa's nutrition tips. This took me less than 10 minutes last night, right? I had written some instructions. You can do this more directly under that configure tab. But I'd mentioned it's a friendly assistant modeled after Amazon's Alexa, embodying a fun-loving but family-friendly personality. I wanted vetted and academically validated nutrition tips, focusing on general dietary guidelines. I hadn't gone into personalization at this point, so let's suppose this is an early prototype validation. I'd given the instructions on how I wanted to present the information, right? Give only one tip at a time, 2 sentences maximum, and then ask the user if they'd like another tip. And always state the source with according to source. You could give it a much longer list of detailed instructions if you like. And in this case, I didn't do it, but you could even include, like, here's the source material I want you to stick to as far as the nutrition tips I consider valid, right? You could ask it to stay away from certain areas like fasting or areas that are definitely contentious and not something that you want to, have your chatbot to have a definitive opinion on that might become something that blows up in the news, for example, right? And you can always preview the chats that your current chatbot will have, flip back and forth between your instructions and how the chatbot is working. So I had just put in the standard invocation of nutrition tips on Alexa. And according to Harvard Public Health, incorporating a variety of fruits and vegetables. So what could this be used for, right? I think it's important to note that you could use this to determine, is personalization something that users really need right from the get-go to love this product? Are they not going to come back to it without personalization? It's also a way to test, like, is this chat text interaction the right interaction, or do people want a button, a more integrated interface, right? Something that's a little more than just a chatbot. On the next slide, Rupa, I'll just give you an example of this. So with custom GPTs, as quick as they are to set up, you have this disadvantage that they have a really limited UX flexibility, right? You are stuck with this looking this way. You can configure the image, the description, even which suggestions you give. But you don't have a lot of options for how this looks. And you can't have the system, say, proactively start the conversation. Or if you wanted something that did a quiz up front that was guiding a user through onboarding, for example, you don't have that control of where the user starts. The user could type anything here in this message, Alexa's nutrition tips. So the advantages, as we saw, really quick and easy to develop with these. It's very simple to iterate. You can share them pretty broadly, just with ChatGPT Plus users, though, which are estimated to be less than 1% of GPT users. So we're still at over 1 million users in that case. And for now, it's free to use, right? But the disadvantages are those interaction patterns are set for you, so you can't really experiment with those if you have hypotheses around that. There isn't any way to share them outside of GPT Plus. So unless you're going to stand over and watch your users using them on your account, you also don't get a lot of information on the back end of how users are using them or any logs and things like that. So there's very little visibility. You always have the risk with all large language models that they will introduce hallucinations. Even the best attempts at prompting can't guarantee this won't happen. And the biggest thing to know is that there are some security risks that are not solved with these ChatGPT plus with these GPT builder GPTs. So it's been shown it's very easy for people to hack them and understand both the prompts you're using, if that's confidential, and the data. So please don't include any private user information, confidential data that's valuable, especially if you're putting these up in the GPT store where anyone can access them. Next slide, please, Rupa. So if you're looking at your options in terms of understanding when to use what, it's important to look at there's sort of different phases in a chat, right? For each interaction, the system is understanding what the user wants, deciding what it should do, deciding what the response should be, and where the knowledge should come from. And while LLMs are easy and quick to develop with, and certainly custom GPTs are as well, they have this kind of black box functionality where you don't really get to inspect what's going on or decide what's going on at each step. With NLU-based systems, you have much more control, but you also have a lot more visibility into the system between steps and why it's making the recommendations or statements that it's making. There are certain applications, like in banking, loan approvals, where regulations stipulate you have to be able to provide some explainability. That's an area of research, but it's not a solved area for large language models. Next slide, please, Rupa. So how we did it for the nutrition assistant. In our case, our system was, as Rupa mentioned, very highly integrated, right? So we were using Alexa was based on an NLU-based system. The understanding piece was just understanding, hey, based on what the user has said, are they requesting a nutrition tip? Or are they saying turn off the volume or turn on the lights, right? And that system would then say, if we've decided that that's what we're doing, very simple logic rule, right? Respond with a nutrition tip. No AI necessary, no expensive calls to a model, right? And the response was simply to pick and read out a tip from the knowledge base. You could make that as simple to just always start with the first one available and read them through for an MVP, to complex, to starting to add personalization there. So you have more flexibility in how you implement that, right? And then this is where we had been using generative AI in this case, where we had a pre-written library of tips that had been vetted and approved from sources that we knew were academically credible. And we were rephrasing them for voice and for listeners using generative AI. So we could actually vet these beforehand. So this offline generation and not actually using the system for real-time chat generation, it's definitely something that costs a lot less, right? You're not making calls to the model for inference at every single interaction with the user. And you can control your costs at scale a lot better that way. I think it's my last slide on the tech side here. So just to an idea of what these different models are good for, right? Custom GPTs can be good for early chatbot prototypes, but given their limitations, it really is, you can only experiment with them so far. I think they're very powerful for some internal use cases where you're not as worried about security and people hacking into the data. The people who have access to this GPT will have access to the data anyway, but you can definitely use them to improve some processes. And using an LLM's API, building systems that way directly, these are great if it has low volume, again, early testing, right? Not a huge number of users, not a high volume of interaction. And especially if you need to understand the diversity. They have lots of different things they want to do, and users say it in lots of different ways, right? The traditional NLU side, on the other hand, is great for high volume, low diversity. They have a limited number of ways they say things. You really need high accuracy or you need transparency. So for both prototyping and so that you could take your prototype and eventually put it into production more easily without rebuilding it entirely, and for scoping your costs for ROI, many folks are moving towards this hybrid approach that gives you some adaptability and the best of both worlds. And that's really the systems we use, using tools like VoiceFlow or chatbotbuilder.ai, that help you understand where you want to introduce LLM-like functionality and where you want to use NLU. And so that's what we use in our course to help you walk through building chatbots and co-pilots.
All right. Thanks so much, Polly. I know we are over time on our section for the content, so I'm going to try and skip through this very, very quickly. We have several questions in the Q&A bot, so we want to make sure that we make time for Q&A. So please bear with me as I quickly rush through this. As a next step, after you have evaluated, your tech stack and you have kind of defined your scope, you want to make sure that all of these different parameters that you have developed your hypothesis, you're able to validate these. And the way we did that for the Alexa, product was basically developing a UX flow or a prototype. Some cases it's harder to create prototypes when they're multimodal devices, etc. But creating something that you can put in the hand of users, making sure that you're validating your hypothesis and testing out whether it's working for the intended audience. Determining your goals and measurement criteria upfront so that you can decide whether your iterations and your prototypes are meeting the goals that you set. So for example, for the nutrition assistant prototype, we just made up a goal saying if we get about 4.5 out of 5-star ratings, that's when we will launch it to beta. Now that's a very high bar, and that's a very standard bar at Amazon, but you could come up with something very simple as a measurement criteria and then decide whether this prototype is ready to be shipped to engineering or not. Conducting user testing and then iterating on that feedback and keep revisiting your goals, making sure that you're hitting the goals that you had determined earlier. And then finally going from MVP to beta, or in Amazon, we used to call this concept web labs, where you roll it out to a select number of users before you do a full rollout. And this process of iterating based on feedback and repeating the process will continue to fine-tune your experience. But this is a no-brainer for a lot of product experiences, but a very critical step in the process for AI products, especially if you do it before your actual rollout to external users. It helps you validate your hypothesis and build a pretty robust product before you even ship it to Eng and you define your go-to-market strategy. So I'm going to skip through the next few slides very quickly and just talk about what's next. One, if you are interested from a design perspective on a step-by-step guide on how to create a chatbot UX flow, please sign up on the Substack link that I'm sharing. It's a very comprehensive guide that helps you understand the core user experience pillars and then how to leverage that to develop an end-to-end flow. And Polly, you want to talk about the webinar?
Yeah, for sure. I have a free masterclass that I'm offering on February 8th. It's called The Path to AI Product Manager. So I have a boot camp for experienced PMs and product leaders that is about eight weeks, designed to take you from an AI newbie to being able to lead successful AI projects without diving too deep into the data science side of things, like many programs I find do, where people are over-indexing on the technical skills rather than the many different skills that PMs really need to succeed leading AI projects and break into careers in AI. Do check that out at aicareerboost.com. And then finally, we do have our upcoming program through Reforge. So our next cohort starts on February 19th. It's a 4-week class. So we've just revamped this to include a bunch of new material around building with custom GPTs and the latest advances in the low-code tools like chatbotbuilder.ai and VoiceFlow. We kicked this class off last year, and we've taught over 500 people. It's been really highly rated and super well received, 4.9 out of 5 for customer satisfaction. We've had some great students come from large companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, etc., through to small companies, consultants, founders have found it really useful. So as part of it, identifying the right use cases, designing a great UX, you'll also be able to get hands-on with a project and build over the course of the 4 weeks and get feedback from us as you go on both the product and the design side. So do join us. Starts on February 19th. So we're going to kick it over to questions. I know we only have 9 minutes. Take 1 minute if you can and go back. Let's upvote in the Q&A tab upvote questions, add your questions. We'd love to dive in. I see one right away that's been upvoted pretty highly about evaluation. Of course, this is top of everyone's minds right now. So there are, I think of evaluation as three different ways, really. There's the business and product metrics about like, hey, was it successful? And did people take our recommendations? Did they add the product to the cart? Did they get their goals met? A lot of the times those aren't really fully evaluatable until the system is live, though, or at least in an A/B test, right? So in the meantime, for progress, you do need ways to automate, and many teams use both human evaluation, where you have annotation guidelines and humans looking over the responses, and automated metrics. And there's a constellation of data science metrics that teams use. Early on, we had Alexa determined which automatable metrics we felt really correlated to the human metrics and human annotations. So that way the tech teams could iterate really quickly on different approaches and know they were directionally good, the system is getting better, but we would always do some final human testing. And I do advocate for that. There's even if you end up using LLMs to evaluate your conversations. There's a lot of new research now into using LLMs to actually adjudicate how good or bad a conversation is on different dimensions like factual correctness or potentially brand damaging answers or bias. I always advocate for humans in the loop at one stage or another. Let's take a look at some more of these questions.
Yeah, I can take the second one. I think
Yeah.
from an idea generation perspective, there is no new process. You just want to set up a brainstorm session, but structure it in a way that the group that is brainstorming is able to kind of focus on the incremental value from AI concepts, so asking themselves that question. So using the jobs to be done framework is a great way to provide that structure to the brainstorming team, be able to nail down what are the different jobs that the user wants to get done from this product, whether it's an existing product that you're trying to elevate using AI or you're building a net new product from scratch. You want to start with what problems you're solving for users, what jobs they want to get done, and then structure some how might we be able to accelerate the experience using AI? How might we be able to deliver 5x value or reduce friction, reduce the number of steps, et cetera, et cetera. So you could come up with a few how might we questions to be able to focus the discussion and ideation around incremental value from AI. Hopefully that answers your question. Paul, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, sure. I did want to clarify. John Proust had asked, one of the slides suggests traditional NLUs are highly flexible, but another suggests it's inflexible. Sorry, that was confusing. So in terms of like flexibility of could they understand new different ways that users start asking a question or new use cases very easily? Large language models are very good at that. And traditional NLU is not, right? It's pretty static in terms of, hey, here's the set things we're going to understand. And we really have a limited range of the ways that users can say it. But the way that the NLUs are flexible is on the technical side, right? So you have a lot more flexibility then of how do we integrate it, right? Someone had asked, can custom GPTs be added to your own website? There's no API for custom GPTs today. So there's no way to stick a new front end on it, right? And things like that. So that's where it's pretty frustrating. I think they are providing ways for you to add them to your own website, at least put them on your own domain. But again, it's just very limited integration options, very limited options if you decided to, you really wanted to stipulate the behavior for interacting with other systems. So you have more technical flexibility, but a lot less user experience flexibility. I hope that helps explain.
Awesome. I'll take the next one. In terms of determining how integrated or standalone, I think from a user perspective, I can answer that, and Polly, feel free to chime in. But you want to understand the distribution mechanism, right? Feature discovery. How are you going to create entry points for this experience? Where does it make sense? If you're thinking integration, where is the user using the current experience and where it makes sense to integrate AI? Versus, hey, we just want to test something very quickly and not disturb the existing user experience, right? So there are a couple of questions around how will you go to market with this? How will you enable feature discovery? How will you drive traffic to a standalone versus, hey, we'll just integrate this and it doesn't require any additional user behavior change or interactions. So you might want to ask some of these questions to have a basic POV and then validate that through prototype and user testing to make sure that you're heading in the right direction.
We have a great question asking about, the hybrid approach, elaborating with an example. And I think even many of the traditional NLU systems are migrating towards this. So in conversational systems, you often have kind of an 80-20 breakdown of the kinds of things users want to do, where 80% are really clear and they're kind of giving a command, right? So if you think of a smart assistant like Alexa or Google Home, there's a lot of Alexa, play music, Alexa, turn the lights on, and things like this, right? Sorry, turn my Alexa off. But there's that 20% of new diverse things that people are asking that are rare, that are related to current events, right? When people started asking about Gabby Petito a few years ago, Alexa didn't know how to handle this or who Gabby Petito was, right? So what you can do is have that 80% handled more efficiently with an NLU-based system for the head utterances, that 80%, and then have pass over to an LLM system for the tail. And as a particular use case grows and becomes something where there's a little more set standard ways of asking, you could pass that off again to, build it into your LLM system. That's one way to keep kind of the costs of migrating between these different models under control. You have that adaptability if you start with a hybrid system.
Awesome. I'm just trying to refresh and see. Kara has an amazing question. Thank you for asking this question. This is not a black and white question. I think this is very subjective, depending on the team's appetite for investment. So the question is, how do you weigh the value of incremental value? You might want to, your team might want to validate whether users even need nutrition tips. Will they engage with it? Will they engage with a device like Alexa or a headless device, right? There's a lot of questions you want to answer before you go into this. I want to deliver the wow aspect of nutrition tips. We were very clear that personalized help is going to be the wow aspect, but getting to that point needs a phase-wise approach, and you keep validating throughout the way that what you're doing is even remotely of interest to the users. But having said that, we did implement a lot of wow factors, even in defining the nutrition tips. We created a personality for the nutrition tips. We made sure that these are not tips that you can find randomly in any other source. The example that Polly showed you in the custom ChatGPT, that was a pretty simple, easily accessible anywhere kind of a tip. We just invested a lot in the quality of the tips to just drive the value up higher. And we also invested in the UX in a way that users could get access to a lot more tips very quickly to see whether they even engaged with it in the first place. But our North Star was very clear: a highly personalized experience that a smart nutrition assistant will remember, different users, dietary restrictions, and personal goals. That was our North Star. But how do you get to that point? That is a team cross-functional discussion you want to have from an appetite, risk, technical feasibility, and resource investment perspective.
Thank you.
Awesome. I think we've got time for one last question, and I loved this one from Gianna. What questions should you ask yourself to determine how integrated versus standalone your MVP should be? I think this is dependent on your ecosystem, right? So are you talking about building an entirely new chatbot, that you're putting on your website, or is this a feature and something that's already kind of a conversational multi-turn experience? But it also has to do with your goals and the goals of that MLP. So I think being really specific around what are you trying, what are you trying to, what hypothesis are you trying to prove along the way? If you're trying to prove that existing users would use this, where are your existing users, right? Are there some integration into a workflow that you need to do for them to find it? Or is this something that you're trying with a new set of users to see the reception that could be more standalone, right? So it really varies upon a bunch of different factors. But I think those are some of the main questions. Where are the users today? How are we going to get their attention to get feedback? What are our goals specifically? Is it testing kind of that they'll use it in context, or that they'll use it at all, or that this is the interaction that they like? And your goals around that. Awesome. Well, I think we're at time for today. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Really appreciate it. Super valuable session. I love these really engaged questions. It was so great to hear from you. And if you'd like to dive deeper, we'd be super excited to have you join us on the Reforge course starting February 19th to get hands-on with you.
Thanks everyone
you
for
all.
joining, and thank you for the amazing questions. Really enjoyed the engagement with all of you.